Hey Wisecrack, Michael here, and today we're talking about a nearly 22-year-old game that still gives us nightmares, the PS2 horror classic Silent Hill 2. Often ranked as among the greatest games ever made, not just in horror, it is influential for other games and films as well. Even Guillermo del Toro confesses to being a fan.
Because it's one of my favorite gaming franchises and storytelling franchises ever.
So what makes it so great? And why did its successors, which borrow so heavily from it, not quite hit the mark? Well, it has a lot to do with the psychological part of its psychological horror. So turn on your radios and grab a plank of wood for this Wisecrack edition on the psychology of Silent Hill 2. And spoilers ahead for an old video game. Let's do a quick recap. Silent Hill 2 is the story of widowed James Sunderland, who arrives at the titular town of Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his wife Mary asking for him to visit. But Mary's been dead for 3 years.
Dead person can't write a letter. Mary died of that damn disease 3 years ago.
So James is understandably confused and decides to investigate. Upon arrival, a pretty mean fog rolls in that hides some grotesque monsters and draw distances. He soon realizes the town is nearly empty save for nightmare fuel. He does, however, meet some normal people. Well, sorta normal. The schlub with a stomach bug Eddie, the lost and erratic Angela, and the really obnoxious little girl Laura, none of whom are all that interested in hanging out or being particularly helpful, like when Laura locks James in a room to die.
Laura! What are you doing?
James also witnesses the main antagonist of the game, everyone's favorite geometric ghoul, Pyramid Head, doing something to two pairs of legs stitched together. Look, we'll get to that. Anyway, he then meets a woman who looks identical to his wife Mary, but weirdly named Maria, who tags along in hopes of escaping the town. After exploring a hospital with questionable health standards, Maria is killed by Pyramid Head, only to be found inexplicably alive a little later. James further explores Silent Hill, repeatedly rescuing Maria and watching her die, rescuing Angela and watching her die, trying to help Eddie and having to kill him, all while that little jerk Laura keeps trying to kill him. This all culminates in James confronting his past. Turns out, he euthanized/murdered his wife as she was wasting away from a terminal illness, both to put her out of her misery and so he might move on with his life. Depending on how you play the game, James can either leave Silent Hill with the wife doppelganger Maria, leave the town with Laura, revive his dead wife using the evil power of the town, or take his own life after being torn apart by guilt. Silent Hill 2 is as tragic as it is scary. Sure, the lighting and the isolating atmosphere makes wandering the empty streets creepy as hell, and yes, waiting for your radio to fill with static as another shambling nightmare approaches can be unbearably tense, but it's James's tragic backstory that makes it all so bleak. To understand how the tragedy and scares work so cohesively, we have to turn to Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung. A one-time pupil of mother-loving Sigmund Freud, Jung believed human neuroses are born out of the subconscious, which is influenced by our desires. He thought of this subconscious desire as a type of energy, a sort of driving force that he referred to as libido. This was different from Freud's definition, which was explicitly sexual, like everything in Freud. As Jung put it, libido denotes a desire or impulse unchecked by any kind of authority, moral or otherwise. Libido is appetite in its natural state. Jung believed our psyche was a self-regulating system, and our libido is part of that. Our libidinal energy or drive simply knows where it should go to help the psyche, likening it to water. The libido has, as it were, a natural penchant. It is like water, which must have a gradient if it is to flow. But, just like water, it can meet resistance and back up. For Jung, this is what depression is, a sort of clog in our libido. So our desires, or libido, shows us where to go, but we have to do the work to pull out that clog. This concept is the first step in understanding the main premise of the game. Most people, quite rightly, wonder why James would go all the way to spooky Silent Hill in the first place when he knows damn well his wife is dead. You know, because he killed her. We might also ask why, as soon as he sees the first half-melted figure move to attack him, he doesn't just turn tail and run right back the way he came in. After all, in some endings, he just strolls right back out of town. No doors lock shut behind him, no fallen rocks block his path. He even has an abundant supply of maps. Instead, James stays because of his subconscious desires. His desire to know who sent the letter, but mostly his desire for forgiveness. This is James's libido in action, pushing him in the directions towards what he desires most and encouraging him to work through the traumas that are clogging up the natural flow of his libido. And that starts before he's even set foot in the town. Once he's there, the Jungian psychology kicks into overdrive. Not long after arriving in the town, through a graveyard I might add, James encounters a monster walking on 2 legs but with no arms and no face, though it must have a mouth because it likes to throw up on him. Another type of monster you meet has 2 sets of legs stitched on top of each other, an anatomical oddity that might in any other scenario seem goofy instead of terrifying. Part of this terror is driven by how they're introduced along with the breakout star of the Silent Hill franchise, Pyramid Head. While searching a hallway, James hears a commotion in one of the rooms. He runs inside and then ducks into a closet, where he peers through the blinds to see what is happening. And what is happening? Jeez. When Pyramid Head's not terrorizing you, he's jamming a long spear or huge sword into women's bodies. And yeah, you can probably see where we're going with this. Silent Hill 2 is full of the types of symbols a Jungian psychoanalyst would love to decode. Jung's theory of symbolism was that certain primal energies, like love and fear, manifest in our psyche as symbols. Sometimes these symbols are specific. A hammer you banged your thumb with could become a symbol of your pain, or stupidity. But sometimes these symbols are shared between all people, and are as primal as the energies they represent. Jung called these kind of symbols archetypes, a phrase you might have heard before.
Patients suffering delusional episodes often focus their paranoia on an external tormentor, usually one conforming to Jungian archetypes.
These archetypes represent figures and characters we see throughout history in different cultures and civilizations. For Jung, the mother is an archetype in every culture and most religions all over the world, symbolizing fertility, the earth, and compassion. While he saw the wise old man archetype as similarly a symbol of age, wisdom, and guidance in a lot of cultures. Now, whether these symbols are actually universal has been contested, but we're just sticking with Jung's model for this video. Whatever form they take, these symbols express a fundamental aspect of our psyche that we have trouble consciously articulating. Per Jung, every psychological expression is a symbol if we assume that it states or signifies something more and other than itself, which eludes our present knowledge. In the case of Silent Hill, we are able to diagnose a lot of what is going on in James's head just through the symbolism in the game. Though some of these symbols are obvious, some aren't. So let's get all Jungian and psychoanalyze James. And apologies in advance, this might get a little graphic. Don't blame us, blame Konami. Let's start with the most obvious symbol, Maria. She is an exact likeness of James's dead wife, but more seductively dressed and aggressively flirtatious. At the end of the game, James confesses he was frustrated and angry with Mary because he wanted to move on with his life instead of having to care for her.
The truth is, part of me hated you for taking away my life.
So when James arrives in a haunted town and meets his wife's near-identical twin with a similar name who is more assertive and sexually alluring, we begin to realize she represents not what his wife was, but what he might have wanted her to be. Knowing this, we realize James's libido might be as sexual as Freud believed after all. So if Maria symbolizes the, frustration James felt during his wife's long illness, that puts into context a lot of other symbols he encounters throughout the game, like Pyramid Head, for instance. James says at the end of the game,
That's why I needed you. Needed someone to punish me for my sins.
Suggesting he or the town created Pyramid Head in an attempt at self-flagellation. But while that might be the monster's purpose, what he symbolizes ties into James's sexual frustrations. Like when we see the muscular, unstoppable powerhouse stabbing his wife's lookalike with a huge long spear and... Look guys, we don't want to get demonetized, but you know what we're talking about, right? This kind of overt sexual symbolism is consistent throughout the game, seen in the nurse in the hospital wearing inexplicably revealing outfits, or those freaky sets of women's legs that are literally attacking you with their, well, you get it. And it's not just the monsters either. The image in the frame when you see Angela for the final time is a corrupted representation of a naked female body. Before that, you find her in a room that has walls seemingly made of flesh. Also, there are orifices above your head with cylinders sliding repeatedly in and out. At other times, the monsters symbolize a less sexual version of James's guilt. The first monsters you meet resemble a person in a straitjacket. This is before you find all the notes about violent patients in the asylum. For James, who we learn felt trapped in his marriage to a dying woman, the symbol of a visibly bound creature attacking him can be seen as a symbol of the restrictions he felt while caring for his wife. The final boss of the game amounts to a surreal, nightmare version of Mary, or Maria depending on how you played the game, strapped in a bed, hanging over James. This image of a woman bound to her bed floating above him, literally hanging over his head as it injures him, symbolizes how James felt about his wife as she was dying, an oppressive presence following him wherever he goes that he ultimately ends up destroying. The other people driven to the town by their libidinal energy are struggling with their own demons too. Early on in the game, James reads a note that says, "I saw those demons. They were there, I'm certain. But my friend says he didn't see anything." If that's true, does that mean that what I saw was an illusion? The more we talk to the other characters, especially Eddie and Angela, we realize they might see things that we don't and vice versa. Not only do characters not see what you see, but mention seeing their own visions.
Red pyramid thing. I don't know what you're talking about. Honest. But I did see some weird looking monsters.
They also exhibit bizarre behavior, best explained by experiencing some other reality. Eddie, who admits to maiming a bully and killing a dog before he attacks you,
"Yeah, I killed that dog. It was fun."
is seen nonchalantly eating a pizza earlier on in the game, right after you found him throwing up into a toilet bowl. Angela, who we discovered killed her father in self-defense when he assaulted her,
Go ahead and say it! Or you could just force me. Beat me up like he always did.
flips between barely noticing you and being terrified of you. She even mistakes you for her mother at the end.
Mama! Mama, I was looking for you.
But before she disappears into the flames, she says,
You see it too. For me, it's always like this.
all of their strange behaviors hint that these characters are also going through their own traumas, implying that Silent Hill could be manifesting each person's own demons. Just like James, they have a libidinal desire which has been clogged by trauma from their past and has brought them there to work through these issues. But because we are playing as James, we don't know exactly what their traumas or desires are and can only see what he sees. But how does all this psychology also make it so scary? There aren't really any jump scares in the game. These symbols simply show you what is going on in James's head without needing to explain it. And this is why a lot of the more recent games, and the movie in particular, missed the point. Instead of exploring the psychology of their main characters, they simply recycle the imagery from Silent Hill 2 that bears no relation to the protagonist, meaning they don't symbolize anything. They're still scary, but don't have the same effect or significance. In the movie, the character of Rose is searching for her adopted daughter who is lost in Silent Hill. While you could argue the creepy baby monsters might be some sort of symbol for Rose's maternal instincts, what does Pyramid Head symbolize? Or the sexy nurses? Silent Hill 2 is still so rewarding by contrast because of another of Jung's psychological processes he called the cathartic method. This is the method of becoming conscious of repressed feelings or trauma through the retelling or reliving of it, also known as abreaction. One then confesses so as to heal and move on. As Jung describes it, the goal of the cathartic method is full confession. Not merely the intellectual recognition of the facts with the head, but their confirmation by the heart and the actual release of suppressed emotion. It's this form of catharsis that Silent Hill 2 captures perfectly. After James watches the videotape of him smothering his wife, the player finally understands his guilt, the traumatic clog that his libido drove him to the town to fix in the first place, and the meaning behind all the gross, sexy monsters. No matter what ending you get, it is satisfying because they all feature a confrontation with his memory of Mary and a reading of her final letter to him explaining her feelings before she dies.
I feel so pathetic and ugly laying here, waiting for you.
It is only when James confronts these symbols of his guilt that the game can finally end. It provides a kind of catharsis for James, and as a result, the player. This is why Silent Hill is still a horror classic. Not just because you probably played it when you were too young, but because it uses actual psychology and Jungian psychoanalysis to get into your head. The town scares its characters by understanding what drives them there in the first place, their libido, that forces them to confront their past traumas. It then plays on those fears and traumas, and because we have come to sympathize with James and co throughout the game, it scares the player too. It takes what James is already afraid of and represents it symbolically so that when his inner and outer demons are defeated, or not depending on your in-game choices, James's story is a cathartic experience about closure and coming to terms with loss. And sex. A lot of it is about sex. In short, it takes this quote from Oscar Wilde literally. We are each our own devil. and we make this world our hell. But what do you think? Let us know in the comments. A big ol' thanks to our awesome patrons for supporting our podcast and the channel. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And as always, thanks for watching. Don't have nightmares, Wisecrack. Peace.